Hey everyone. So, gig economy, worker empowerment, or are we crushing their souls? Prop 22 passed in California. I want to extend my riff from last week and talk a little bit more about, is that a good thing? Hi, Brant Cooper here. I'm fortunate I get to travel around the world speaking with startup founders, investors, ecosystem developers. I've learned a lot in my travels. I've got some stories, and I have some thinking that I love to share. Welcome to Brant's Rant. We tend to think about different aspects of our economic system independently. So we think, okay, is the government doing the right thing via antitrust? Uh, what should the government be doing in terms of supporting labor, passing labor laws, minimum wage, allowing them to organize. We think about consumer welfare separately, um, inflation, uh, protection of the environment, um, safety of the products or of food and water, and these different elements that affect consumers. And then even the government itself is sort of this separate entity. Instead of viewing this as a system that uh, will come to some sort of equilibrium based upon the balance of those different powers. So the three powers being owner of the business, worker, and consumer. So they all have these different roles, but also multiple roles within that system. So they're wearing different hats, and then it's the government's responsibility essentially to manage the power of those different entities such that those opposing forces creates an equilibrium, and whatever that equilibrium happens to be, which will vary over time and based upon all sorts of other factors, but what that equilibrium looks like determines things like the acceptable rate of unemployment or inflation uh, or worker safety or worker compensation or healthcare or all of these different things, come into play. We get to supposedly in a democracy, we would decide on what does the system equilibrium look like, and then we should feel free to balance the powers in order to get the equilibrium that we want to see. But since we treat all of those elements separately, we don't think about the overall equilibrium of this system. So I talked the last couple of weeks about this growing concern over tech company power and corporate consolidation in general, and the fact that we really haven't enforced existing laws on the book. Hey, law and order people, you know the law. So we should enforce the law. Uh, and so you know, all of the folks that want to argue that we shouldn't do antitrust, you're really arguing to change the law, not whether you should enforce the law or not, because it's not fair or it's not your version of capitalism or whatever. And so I wanted to think about what can we do in addition to trying to decrease the power of corporates. We can also then look at what are those other elements and can we increase the power there. And I think that the worker power is an interesting one. Um, when we view it independently, and the way the courts actually used to view this is that uh, an individual worker has the power to walk away from a job. And so therefore, the relationship between the power or the worker and the employer is the same level of power because they both can agree to come to terms or not. And it's one of those things that if we go back to a different rant on models, right, that the whole point of models is that they somehow describe reality. It's super easy to see, right, that an employee and an employer do not come to the table with equal power. The employer has, you know, huge pool of individuals that they can hire. So they can immediately say, well, no, that you're not right for this job, or if you don't like the terms I'm offering, then too bad. Whereas the employee, the worker, doesn't have that level of power. They are they don't have all of the different options, and they don't and their life depends upon it, right? I mean, their health, their living conditions, having a shelter, having food, the guaranteed liberties, the pursuit of happiness. The worker does not have that power to say no in the same way. So those two entities are coming to the table with different degrees of power. And so back in the New Deal days, the courts started becoming more open to that line of reasoning. And so that's when they started to allow regulations that increased the power of the employee via the employer. And some of those things are what paved the way for, certainly not a perfect economic system by any stretch, but generally then, New Deal age up through the 70s, early 70s, there was a lot of prosperity and really the growth of the middle class and raising the standard of living. And that it ends up creating this more positive cycle where because workers can afford homes and cars and appliances and all of these type of things, that creates demand. They're able to purchase all of these products from the companies, and so it creates this positive cycle. So in the 70s, we started seeing a reversal of those trends, and the court started going back to this sort of independent, one-on-one view that they were coming to terms with equal power, and that was really the right way to see the negotiations between worker and owner, and we start seeing the accepted decline of the power of unions and union participation. So California passed a law that made it a lot tougher for employers to designate certain jobs as being held by contractors versus employees. And the reason why they did that, for one, was that meant that they were not held to labor laws. And so they didn't have to pay benefits, and they didn't have to pay, minimum wage, and they didn't really even have to enforce other sort of labor laws about number of hours and all these other types of things. And so the gig economy, card sharing services objected to that because they felt like their business, or what they claimed anyway, with their business really wasn't about hiring employees, to drive cars. That wasn't the business model, which was kind of like a wacky theory. But eventually they ended up threatening to leave if California didn't change that law. Frankly, I think that as a human being, you should always allow the company to leave, because you're just sort of purposely creating this wrong power dynamic if businesses can threaten to leave and then extort concessions. Hey, thanks for listening to Brandt's Rant. If we're choosing capitalism here as a society, then let's make it work for a better world. If you'd like to join me as we redefine capitalism for the 21st century, go to beatcoop.co/D4A. Also, if you have a pressing issue that you're facing in your innovation group, your product group, your startup, and want to join me on video, see the link below. Subscribe, like, see you next time.